All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the Global Summit. I am delighted to present our next panel session, jointly hosted by our partners, the RBM Partnership for Malaria and the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. So this discussion will discuss how innovation in diagnostics can play a role in reshaping the global response to malaria, but most importantly, how policymakers can scale up the commitments to the malaria response in times of COVID. To moderate this exciting lineup of speakers, I would like to introduce Honorable 𝗧𝗽𝗍𝗻𝗏𝗡. 𝗧𝗽𝗍𝗻𝗏𝗡 is the Executive Secretary of the African Leaders Malaria Alliance. Previously, she had served as a member of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on the global response to health crisis, chaired the Aspen Institute's Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health, and co-chaired the independent expert review group for Every Woman, Every Child, reporting to the UN Secretary General on developing country-level progress on women's and children's health. Honorable Joy, thank you for being here. I now turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. Honorable ministers, members of parliament, distinguished participants. As you know, as you have heard, the session will be addressing leadership opportunities for joint action against malaria and, of course, COVID-19. We have heard from the first panel how unprepared we were for the global pandemic that is currently ravaging our health systems and, of course, crippling our economies. Indeed, WHO has predicted that if we sustain the required vector control, we could, if we don't sustain the required vector control, we could regress to the malaria morbidity and mortality rates we had at the turn of the century, wiping out 2 decades of progress that has seen us avoiding 93 million cases of malaria and 590,000 deaths annually. Even with this progress that we had seen before COVID, we had continued to lose 380,000 lives in Africa, most of them children under the age of 5. This pandemic has indeed been challenging. It has been challenging because, first of all, our systems were not ready to deal with a pandemic. But apart from our systems not being ready to deal with a pandemic, the serious risk that the pandemic poses to the communities has led to people avoiding going to health facilities and seeking testing and treatment for malaria. It has led to shortages of stocks and supplies. And following the unusually high amount of rain across parts of Southern Africa, we've witnessed upsurges of malaria across the region. And with borders closed and supply chains disrupted, we have experienced stockouts of critical malaria commodities, and we have scrambled literally to manufacturers across Asia and Europe in order to get access to the commodities that are normally easy to access. I want to congratulate those leaders who have actually made an effort, including the members of parliament and ministers, in order to overcome these challenges. To succeed, we must sustain ending malaria as a strategy priority at all levels, because we cannot afford to be dealing with 2 epidemics, 2 pandemics or more at the same time. So routine health systems must be delivered. The global community, local community, members of parliament, ministers, the business sector, everybody must be engaged in order to make sure that we mobilize resources, we mobilize capacities, and we address the gaps that exist, not just for malaria, for COVID-19, and for all essential health services. This year, the chair of the African Leaders Malaria Alliance is His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta of the Republic of Kenya. We are fortunate today to have the Cabinet Secretary, His Excellency Senator 𝗤𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 who is going to give us a message from His Excellency President Kenyatta, sharing with us the vision of His Excellency and the way in which His Excellency sees us addressing this pandemic at the same time that we continue to make progress in the fight against malaria. Honorable Minister, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. Honorable members of Parliament, distinguished guests and participants, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the first Global Summit of UNITE Members of Parliament. I bring you greetings from the Chair of the African Leaders Malaria Alliance and President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta. The Alliance of Africa Heads of States and Governments is working to end malaria on the African continent by 2030. There are many public health challenges afflicting the African continent, but malaria, which is not only treatable but also preventable, remains one of the most deadly challenges. The deadly effects of malaria lead to devastating consequences on families, health systems, and the economy. His Excellency, President Uhuru Kenyatta, has made health one of the 4 key pillars of his domestic agenda and is committed to implementing health systems reforms to accelerate movement towards universal health coverage as a means of ensuring access by communities to preventive and curative services of infectious diseases. In Kenya and many other countries, governments and global partners have worked hard to ensure universal access to effective malaria interventions. Although Kenya and other countries have witnessed a reduction of the malaria burden following these interventions, it is worrying that the progress is reducing, and what this means is that people are indeed dying. Indeed, the World Health Report indicates that in 2018, over 200 million people contracted malaria, and it killed about 380,000 people. This threatens to undermine the global progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As you are aware, we are all committed to develop national responses whose implementation will go a long way in ensuring that we achieve 𝗢𝗍 by 2030. The COVID-19 global pandemic is a new threat to our communities and countries. It puts more pressure on our fragile health systems and disrupts routine health services, including immunization, treatment of life-threatening illnesses such as malaria, diarrhea, pneumonia, among many others. Kenya is committed to providing essential life-saving interventions while we respond to this global pandemic. For example, while observing COVID-19 safety measures, Kenya is in the final stages of ensuring the distribution of 15 million bed nets to populations at risk of malaria across the country. Sadly, many of these life-saving interventions, such as bed nets, are not readily available across the continent. Part of the lessons, as Joy has said, that we have learned from COVID-19 is that you could have money, but supply constraints may still render you without pharmaceutical commodities. There is therefore a great need to ensure that we have capacity for local manufacturing of these life-saving supplies. Since no country can fight this problem alone, our defense mechanism must act in unison at national, regional, and global levels. The chair of the African Leaders Malaria Alliance, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, has laid out a 4-point agenda to help African countries in their efforts towards ending malaria. And these include digitization and real-time access to malaria data, engagement with African regional economic blocs for domestic resource mobilization, creating national end malaria councils and funds, and finally, the establishment of a youth advisory group to champion malaria commitments. If programs and projects under this 4-point legacy agenda are implemented, there is no doubt that Africa will be laying a strong foundation towards the control and elimination of malaria in a sustainable manner. Furthermore, there is a need to invest in research and learn from countries that have been able to eliminate malaria, such as Cuba, Italy, and Japan. In Africa, Algeria has joined the list of these countries, and we congratulate them. As a former member of Parliament myself, I know the important role parliaments play in assisting this agenda of eliminating malaria and what further could be done. Parliamentarians can establish the legislative framework to make the needed resources available and to facilitate efforts in fostering technical and political convergence in the fight against malaria, despite and even within the challenges of this COVID-19 pandemic. You are, as parliamentarians, also able to create the regulatory environment that encourages the local manufacture of life-saving commodities so that we can boost our economies and create local and malaria funds. You can also fast-track legislation necessary for reforms in the health sector that inform faster decision-making and elimination of bureaucratic challenges. More resources for health will ensure that we do not reverse the tremendous gains made in health over the last 20 years. But even more importantly, you can help foster research into high-impact strategies and interventions that could indeed help fast-track the elimination of malaria from the African continent. I hope that your deliberations over the next 2 days will be productive and believe that our concerted efforts will defeat malaria once and for all. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you. It was excellent, and thank you very much for laying the foundation of what His Excellency would like to see us doing on the African continent, but most importantly, using your own country as an example of how we can continue to deliver health services and do adequate vector control in the midst of this crisis. Indeed, His Excellency personally contacted the Prime Minister of India to make sure that India continues to export malaria commodities, particularly medicines, to the African continent in the midst of this crisis. Your Excellency, Honorable Minister, I just want to underscore the role that I see for members of parliament from what you have just said about the president's priorities and agenda, the digitalization and real-time data using in order to inform decision-making. We urge members of parliament to use the scorecards that the countries are currently providing, so that they can work with you, ministers of health, to keep track of progress in the fight against malaria and to be able to see where the bottlenecks are in their own constituencies so that they can be able to support the fight against malaria in their constituencies. His Excellency has advocated for the establishment of anti-malaria funds, multi-sectoral initiatives, political initiatives, private sector initiatives, which are driven by the private sector. And in these councils will help the government and the sector to actually mobilize resources from the private sector, from individuals. We urge members of parliament to participate in these councils and to support their creation and the resource mobilization efforts that they are undertaking. His Excellency is launching a youth army, and we know that there is a critical number of young members of parliaments in our parliaments, and we urge the members of parliament to engage the youth, because the majority of the population in Africa, particularly, are young people, and we have a potential to harness this demographic dividend. He asks for sub-regional collaboration, and we know that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement has been ratified by over 30 countries so far. So members of parliament, we urge you to get every single African country to ratify the Continental Free Trade Agreement, because this will enable us to accelerate the efforts that we are making in manufacturing drugs and commodities, and also enable free movement of goods. But to further set the stage, I have the pleasure of introducing a senior specialist from the Global Fund, and he is going to talk to us about exactly what it is that these global initiatives are doing in order to not just support what we are doing, but in order to think ahead and make sure that even when we have an pandemic such as this, they are versatile and nimble enough to be able to support us better to deal with these challenges. Scott, the floor is yours. And you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you for leading us through today's discussion. I also want to thank the Unite Parliamentary Network for convening this summit over the next 2 days. Thank you very much to the Honorable Secretary for sharing his perspectives. I also want to thank our partners at Roll Back Malaria, who the Global Fund joined with to co-organize today's panel. And I especially want to thank all of the members of Parliament who have made time to participate in this discussion. As you've already heard, and as you're going to continue to hear a lot today about the magnitude of the challenges that we are facing right now. And in terms of mounting an effective response to those challenges, the role of parliamentarians, as the Honorable Secretary emphasized, is more important now than ever, particularly as that relates to resource mobilization. Your role in budget allocation to ensure whether it's domestic resources to respond to this pandemic or funds from donor countries around the world, that role is always critical, but especially in this pandemic and especially in the next few months. At the Global Fund, we allocate over $4 billion US every year to combat infectious diseases. And we're the largest international funder for the global malaria response, and also the largest funder for the global TB response, and the second largest funder for the global HIV response. And when we look at the modeling that our technical partners like Rollback Malaria, WHO, and others have done in recent months, the results are really concerning, because what they're finding is that if we continue to see in the coming months disruptions in service delivery, we could see progress against malaria as well as HIV and TB rolled back by a decade or more, as Joy previously emphasized. Specifically in terms of malaria, in the worst case scenarios, we see deaths potentially doubling in the course of the next year, which would actually set back progress more like 2 decades. At the Global Fund, we've regularly been conducting surveys of the programs that we fund in over 100 countries around the world. And about 3/4 of those programs are already reporting disruptions in service delivery. And more than 1/4 are already characterizing those disruptions as either high or very high. So we very much view this fight against COVID-19 and the fights against malaria and other infectious diseases are one and the same. And one of the ways that the Global Fund has always approached the fight against infectious diseases is we allocate about 1/4 of our funds every year towards health system strengthening. So that translates to about $1 billion every year. That makes us the largest multilateral grant funder for health system strengthening. These are things like strengthening supply chains, improving labs and laboratory networks, strengthening the healthcare workforce, data systems, financial management, community response systems, the kinds of things that need to be scaled up dramatically in the coming months. And because we've been doing this for nearly 2 decades, we believe we have developed a set of core capabilities that we have a responsibility to leverage in this fight against COVID. Things like engaging with local communities, working through local supply chains, working in partnership to implement programs with not only communities and civil society, but also governments and the private sector. Procuring high quality health products at a fair price at scale. Again, these are the kinds of things that need to be scaled up and scaled up dramatically in the coming months. And in order to do so, we've joined with global health organizations, governments, private sector partners, and others to form the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, the ACT Accelerator, which has become the largest coalition worldwide to accelerate the development of new diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines, the tools that are needed to fight COVID-19, and to make sure that we also are developing the ability to produce and manufacture these new tools, and to make sure they're deployed in an equitable, fair manner that leaves no one behind. So the ACTA coalition has determined that over the course of the next 12 months, over 31 billion US is going to be needed in those 3 areas: diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. And actually, if you take into account the additional investments in underlying health systems to make sure we're ready to efficiently and effectively deploy those new tools, the number increases to about 40 billion. At the Global Fund, if we looked at playing a role that's commensurate with the role that we're currently playing in the fights against malaria, TB, and HIV, our need in the coming 12 months is about 6 billion. We've already been able to pull together 1 billion from grant savings and other resources. And we've pushed that money out to countries to combat COVID, to strengthen their underlying health systems, to protect their frontline health workers, and to adapt their malaria as well as their HIV and TB programs. So at the Global Fund, we have a need to mobilize an additional 5 billion for the coming 12 months. We're going to be working with parliamentarians, governments, all of our partners around the world to mobilize those resources in the coming months, and to work with our partners in the ACTA coalition to make sure that that full 40 billion is available. And I just want to end by saying, I certainly understand that that number might sound big, 40 billion. But if you look at the nearly 10 trillion that governments have already had to allocate to respond to the health and economic impacts of this crisis, that is much less than 1%. And in terms of the economic impact, if the impact on GDP continues into 2021 at just 10% of what we're seeing in 2020, accelerating these new tools by just 1 month entirely pays for that additional money. So again, your role as parliamentarians and all the partners who work with them is going to be more essential than ever, particularly in the next few months. Back to you, Joy.
Thank you so much. This is extremely useful, and it gives a very, very broad framework that countries can then start applying at country level. And to look at it from that country's perspective, we are fortunate to have 𝗨𝗡𝗃𝗃 𝗏𝗃𝗃 and Malaria Council member from Zambia, from the Zambian Revenue Authority, who will be able to share with us this country perspective. 𝗨𝗃𝗃, you have the floor, and you have 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Generally, my presentation is looking at how Zambia is partnering with various stakeholders, both in terms of the public sector, the private sector, the community, and other partnerships to ensure that we foster the agenda of eliminating malaria or ending malaria in this country. So this is a partnership that involves the public sector, government, the members of parliament, the ministers in particular. We have ministers who sit on the council, who are Minister of Finance, the minister who are members of the council, Minister of Finance, Minister of Health, and Minister of Tourism. We also have the minister in the Vice President's office who are also part of the council. Then in the private sector, we have various stakeholders from the financial sector, from the manufacturing sector, and many other sectors. Also under the community partnerships, we have the traditional leaders, the churches, and various community-based organizations. So to get into understanding how we are dealing with this in Zambia, we look at how this improves productivity. Now, when we look at this, what we are saying is that on average, workers in Zambia miss an average of 2.5 days of work per case. This includes their family members, leading to about 8.7 million missed days of work in Zambia. And this is actually quite huge. It disturbs development, it disturbs productivity. Productivity is a major driver to development of any country. Therefore, malaria elimination reduces, if we do not eliminate malaria, this reduces the GDP growth by about 1.3% per year due to lower productivity and diversion of funds that are required for us to develop our country and move our country forward. Because these are finances that are supposed to be meant for infrastructure development, commerce, education, and many other sectors. But we end up investing time and money into malaria. Now, when you look at the investment that is being put, there's an issue of return on investment that comes in. It has been scientifically proved and also been noted that investment in malaria has yielded about 36-1 in terms of return on investment ratio globally, and countries that have eliminated malaria continue to invest into the prevention of this, and this helps them just reduce their cost significantly. Coming to the issue at hand, which is for today. As the Zambia Revenue Authority, which is an authority that is mandated for tax collection in the country, we are members of the End Malaria Council, and our role is actually we are in between the private sector and the public sector, because we are a quasi-government institution. And what we do is that we try and look at direct relationships, how, if we are members of the council, how does this benefit the tax authority? We are already working with the already existing resources that we have as an authority. And what we are doing, our contribution basically to the End Malaria Council, together with our partners, who are also bringing in different facets, because all the partners on the bring something to the table so that we can meet the overall goal. So in particular, zeroing it down to the tax authority, which we believe that probably some countries would adopt and use a similar approach to help them basically fight malaria. What we're doing is that as an authority, we have a huge budget in terms of tax education and communication. Just like you see most telecom companies would have a huge budget in terms of advertising and other things. So within the already existing budget, what we are doing is that we are running malaria adverts that are running on various radio and TV stations countrywide, with more than 18 radio stations running at national level and community level, and adverts to do with malaria are being run, and more than 9 million viewers are able to listen and catch this or get these messages via this platform. The Zambia Revenue Authority is also providing high-level interviews for the End Malaria Council members and the National Malaria Elimination Program to continue featuring targeted messages to various audiences countrywide. This, like I said, is already incorporated in our day-to-day tax education budget. And we are not putting in any extra resources, but providing the already existing platforms to push the already existing agenda of eliminating malaria. Then, because we are now into COVID period, what we have done is that we have noted that to a great extent in Zambia, we see people mixing up the symptoms of malaria and the symptoms of COVID. At the same time, some people tend to just get that mix up. So what we've done is that to avoid that, we have blended the COVID-19 messages that are running on our national broadcaster, which is ZNBC, and other private stations like ZTV and Diamond TV that are running. We have blended the COVID messages together with the malaria messaging. Maybe if the video is ready, maybe we could just play the video so that our colleagues could appreciate what we're talking about. The video we're about to play shows you basically, these are two local popular comedians who are very well known back here in Zambia, and we've used their talent to try and champion the cause. So maybe we can play the video.
No! Stay back. Huh? I have COVID-19.
What?
I have fever, body pains, headache, and nausea. I don't want to die.
Ish, clearly this isolation has gone to your head. If you had COVID, you would have had a cough and difficulties breathing. You, my friend, have malaria.
No, it can't be. Isn't malaria on vacation or something? With mosquitoes far, far away on a beach having a blast, leaving COVID-19 as the substitute.
Voila! This is when mosquitoes are busy. Kindly people are staying home. Besides, how would you have gotten COVID-19 if you've been indoors this whole time? Wait, have you been sleeping under a mosquito net?
Ati?
Always sleep under a treated mosquito net. Let's get you to a clinic ASAP. Remember, malaria ends with you.
Malaria ends with me.
COVID-19 causes coughing, fever, and breathing difficulties. If you develop these symptoms, stay home and call 9094 for assistance. But if you develop malaria symptoms, fever, headache, nausea, body pains, immediately go to the nearest health facility or community health worker for testing. If you test positive for malaria, take the full course of the correct medicine. This message is brought to you by the Ministry of Health in partnership with PATH, 𝗬𝗓𝗏𝗧 Cross-Border Malaria Initiative, the Anglican Diocese of Lusaka, and 𝗓𝗏, proud members of the Malaria Council.
We have so far invested about roughly about �1 million kwacha, which is about $70,000 in various education messages that are being pushed out in terms of malaria. But almost my time up. As I wind up, what we've done also is to ensure that we have a vigorous fight against smuggling. And what we're doing is that any person who smuggles any items into the country, we seize the goods and the vessel. And what we do with the vessels is that we have decided to donate some of these seized motor vehicles to the Malaria Council as a way of just ensuring that we empower the Malaria Council, have running materials in terms of vehicles that help them go out and basically meet their needs in terms of residue spraying and other administrative needs. I think since my time is up, also just the last point is that we are also facilitating tax exemptions that are being done. Once the Malaria Council meets the necessary needs and regulations, then that aside, there are many other issues that we are doing in terms of ensuring that we help the Malaria Council and the Ministry of Health clear their goods at the fastest possible time to ensure that they get to the expected people on time and in good time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃. I think you have really demonstrated how an effective Malaria Council works. And the message that I'm getting from you is that members of the council have got comparative advantages. You have to be innovative, think outside the box, and you can have massive impact, because in the short time that your council has been operating, you have really had massive impact. And this is a very important to share, and we really appreciate what your council is doing, and setting a good example for other countries. Now, we know that while we are fighting for the regional free trade agreement, continental free trade agreement, this is talking about human beings. But there are other members of the fight against malaria, particularly our enemies, who don't need passport to cross borders. And these are the mosquitoes. They don't need any passports. They cross at will. So they've had a free trade agreement all along while we are still negotiating ours. And we have here with us Honorable Dr. 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, former Minister of Health of Namibia, Ambassador of the Elimination 8. And he's going to tell us about regional collaboration, how we can go and fight these enemies in the space that they occupy across borders, so that we can actually win that fight, and how they've been able to do this effectively during the COVID-19 pandemic, even to address stockouts. Dr. Kamui, you have the floor. 10 minutes, please.
The floor. Honorable 𝗙𝗂𝗵𝗶, honorable members of Parliament present, I'd like to acknowledge the organizers of this important forum, panel members, colleagues. SADC Elimination 8 is an initiative signed by 8 Southern African countries in 2009 in Maputo, Mozambique, and the host being Windhoek, Namibia. The initiative was premised based on the introduction that my dear sister had just elaborated on. There is interconnectedness of countries, sharing related populations, economies, epidemiology, and most importantly, the ecology of the enemy that we are dealing with, the vector. Over time, the region learned that no single country, no matter the strength, can eliminate on itself. And as the economies grow, people within the SADC or within the community move more frequently, creating wealthy and security alike. What does this E8 stand for? First is the vision. They espouse a malaria-free Southern Africa. And secondly, its goal is to create a platform for strategic collaboration and coordination, leading to zero malaria. Now, what are its intended objectives? Clearly, if we are to meet the intended objective, the following has to be put in place. 1, coordination, the regional coordination to achieve zero malaria across E8 by 2030, as illustrated by the Honorable 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃. Secondly, to advocacy, elevate and maintain malaria high on regional leadership agenda. And thirdly, harmonization, to harmonize, promote policy harmonization, knowledge management and quality control leading to elimination. And fourthly, engagement, to facilitate reduced cross-border transmission, finally to sustain resource mobilization efforts to ensure sustainable financing for elimination ambition. It is important to note that the E8 initiative, it is headed by the E8 Ministerial Committee, which is the supreme decision-making institution of the E8. All ministers in SADC are members of Parliament. Yours truly, I had been a member of parliament for 15 years. Now, while these tremendous achievements have been made over the past decade, there have been some cause for concern. And what are these challenges? First is the inter-country importation and exportation, which continues to this end. Secondly, inadequate investment to drive elimination. You need domestic financing to be updated. Competing priorities such as what has brought us, and that is COVID-19 as a global pandemic. The misalignment between national budget and malaria cycle, which warrants intervention during epidemics, and the public service management bottlenecks, which relates to procurement and supply chain management. And lastly, in this area of challenge, is the cyclical malaria outbreaks in Southern Africa, especially 2019 and 2020. You may wish honorable members to know that during the course of this season, only two member states of Eswatini and South Africa survived the epidemic. What then were the responses from the E8 working together with the member states? How has the E8 responded to commodity challenges under COVID-19 pandemic and malaria upsurges in the region? In the first half of 2020, E8 responded to the challenges in 3 ways, which are this: 1, regional coordination, a platform. First, the E8 has, that's the E8 secretariat, has the E8 situation group, and this operates during the high season. Secondly, virtual partnership forum, which takes place on a weekly basis, and it involves all partners. Secondly, the advocates at political level, and that includes the honorable members of parliament. Ministers especially reacted to COVID-19 during the course of this season. They had deliberated on the elimination agenda. And then secondly, we have the E8 senior officials virtual meeting to commit support on malaria. And who are these? These are in reference to the permanent secretaries, director generals, and EDO executive directors, as they are known in some member states like Namibia. And thirdly, the E8 Council of Ministers ring-fenced malaria resources. And thirdly, the resource mobilization, sharing and pooling. Here I wish to share that first, the E8 resource leveraging in support of both malaria and COVID-19, and B, mobilization of extra technical support from partners for country support. And I would like to add C, being we had leadership to allow malaria workers to continue work, and that is even amidst COVID-19 pandemic. What then were the overall results of these exercises? First, or A, the region, that is SADC, was able to ring-fence malaria resources. That's advocating of galvanizing resources more and more. Secondly, countries received malaria and COVID-19 commodities against all odds. Thank you. And finally, may I say that resources to support malaria field workers, mitigation of malaria upsurge, partnership was put in place, and that senior officials committed to a region response. Moderator, I would like to end by saying it is important to note that in SADC, E8, all ministers are members of parliament. They are either voting or non-voting members, but also to support the just cause of malaria elimination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Kamwe. Thank you very much. Your message is clear. There's an African proverb which people have seen everywhere, that you can travel far alone. Not far, sorry, fast. I beg your pardon. You can travel fast alone. But if you want to travel far, and if you want to have a sustainable impact, which is eliminating this disease for good, you have to travel together. And that is exactly what His Excellency Ambassador Kamwe was saying. The SADC countries are traveling together. Now, together with who? We have to travel with civil society. Civil society is a very important partner, critical in the engagement with parliamentarians, critical in the engagement with communities, whether it is determining of the health budget or indeed addressing COVID-19 and malaria together. And we are fortunate today to have Olivia Ngo. I should have learned how to pronounce your surname. I apologize. She's the global coordinator for the Civil Society Network for malaria elimination. So Olivia, you have the floor, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak with you today, honorable parliamentarian, distinguished guests. We are very, very honored to be able to speak with you today, particularly because at this time, as you know, the world is shaken by a global pandemic caused by COVID-19. But we as civil society and representative of communities, we represent people, and we are actually very concerned about the effect of COVID-19 on the malaria programs and services, which affects men, women, and children in many of our countries. So with civil society have worked with parliamentarians in the past, and we have done great work together, joining forces. For example, in many countries, we have organized community dialogues with parliamentarians, so parliamentarians can get to know the needs and the situation of communities highly impacted and highly at risk of malaria. We have also organized sessions with national malaria control programs and parliamentarians for the national programs to present to parliamentarians the current situation of malaria in countries, but also the gap and the need in terms of domestic funding, especially co-funding and co-financing amount that our countries and our leaders needed to commit and to make sure that we can deliver on to ensure the continuity of malaria programs. So we have also developed with parliamentarians specific malaria action plan, which are roadmaps with specific indicators on the role that parliamentarians can play. For instance, to make sure that they can monitor a national budget, to make sure that they can protect and the need of communities in those budgets, to make sure that they can expand also community health workers to increase accesses to malaria services for high-risk groups. So we know that, for example, one of the malaria strategy is to really rely on community health workers to reach people in the most remote area and area where they don't usually have access to health centers, to quickly diagnose them with rapid diagnostic tests and to give them simple malaria treatment who can save a child or anyone's life in just 3 days. So this expansion of community health workers is critical for progress in malaria. And we were happy to see that in many countries, and even here in Cameroon, when the COVID-19 pandemic started, the government actually called all the community health workers working on the malaria program to ask them to go in the community and to help the government to find, to track and find potential COVID-19 cases, because there were no other way to find these communities who may have had COVID, because people were locked down in their house. So the only means to find them was via community health workers, and they did door-to-door sensitization. They went visiting people's house door-to-door to try to find potential COVID-19 cases, and they brought a lot of people to get tested on time, and they brought a lot of people to get treated. So community health workers are key when it comes to malaria, when it comes to COVID-19, and also for any other emerging pandemic. So it's essential that as parliamentarians, you can also work with us, with civil society and community, to ensure that everyone has equal access to health services and malaria services. And we also know that equity is key. We need to ensure that even people in the most remote area have access not only to COVID-19 communication or information, but also malaria information where they are, because they are not able to be online, to have internet, or to actually watch mainstream media and radio. So they will rely on community health workers to be able to give them the right information, whether it's COVID-19 and malaria. So it's critical that we work together. We continue to work together with you, parliamentarians, in countries where you are. We have 280 members in 43 countries, and we are willing to work with you in our countries to make sure that we can raise awareness about the fact that success is not only measuring the reduction of cases of COVID-19 or cases of death or number of deaths of COVID-19. So success is not only that, but success is also making the due impact of COVID-19 on malaria, on HIV, and on tuberculosis. So success for us, community, means that while this COVID-19 pandemic is taking place and while we're fighting COVID-19, we also ensure malaria services continue to be delivered, and we ensure that we leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. That is excellent. And I'm sure the members of parliament have gotten the message very, very clearly. We congratulate you for the work that you are doing during this pandemic to make sure that we continue to be able to reach households and communities where they are. Now, financing malaria programs at this time has had to be reoriented, if for lack of a better word, in order to make it still as rapid as possible during these challenging times. And the Global Fund is going to come back to explain to us how, give us country examples that highlight the risks, the opportunities, the challenges that they have faced in doing this. And I'm sure you'll be able to see, as they related, how the members of parliament could engage and make this whole process much smoother. Thank you, Scott. Is it you who is coming in?
Yes, sorry, and I'll be the second Scott from the Global Fund today. And thank you to all the esteemed guests on the line and for including the Global Fund at this very important global summit today. I'm just going to give you a little bit to try to describe how your international partners are trying to be responsible, respective, and reactive in this context of this dual discussion about trying to stay true to our core about fighting malaria, but also in this complicated context of COVID-19. As you heard earlier, the Global Fund is the single largest financier of health programs, but it's very much in our parlance that we're only successful when we are responsive to country needs. And when we mean that, that is a very broad coalition of people that galvanize at the country level to fight malaria. We have to work with our partners, but we're trying really to stay flexible to the changing demands, fill the gaps where necessary, and really invest strategically to try to do as best as we can to protect the health and well-being of the populations that we serve. I think in order to start this conversation, I think it's always good to understand before COVID-19 that the attack on malaria that we're collectively doing is not routine. There's nothing routine about it. We may refer to routine activities before COVID-19, but attacking malaria at its core is so critical for the health and well-being, for economic prosperity to occur, and that's really part of why the Global Fund was created. So when we talk about the response and what we're doing, of course, the first thing we must discuss is the value that the national programs are bringing to this. We can't be successful without those important voices. We need to make sure that malaria stays part of an essential packages of services. When people talk about things that may be delayed in a time period, malaria is not one of those issues. We need to make sure to both protect health workers so they feel comfortable delivering services, as well as protect people who access those services so that these things can ongo. And always just keeping track, like as that nice video from Zambia showed, that malaria doesn't take a holiday and can be one of the worst killers in this pandemic. So it's so important to strike that appropriate balance between addressing the new threats, but never losing track or never becoming complacent about malaria. As we look at how to adapt health programs, we are hoping that we can return, to a sense of normalcy as soon as possible, but that may not happen in any time soon. So in our strategic planning and discussions with countries, we're looking even out towards mid-2022 that we may have to adjust programs in that context. And hopefully, like as I said, at that time, COVID will have dissipated, but we're understanding that those perturbations may extend to that period. So we're trying to plan appropriately. And during this time period of our Global Fund cycles, we're really focusing on the core money. Through our Step Up the Fight campaign, we raise a significant amount of money for Global Fund coffers. And so we never want to lose track of that ongoing programming, which can provide essential health commodities and the capacity needed to deliver them, and not lose track of that processes while we're doing these special adaptations. Those adaptations that we'll talk about do include maintaining that these big campaign style activities move forward, making sure that we get IRS commodities in country on time to spray, looking at countries that are adapting their LLIN campaign so people don't have to gather together. We saw a beautiful example from Benin to get out their campaigns, get the nets door to door so that people weren't at risk of getting COVID but still able to get their nets. Pushing forward is the season for seasonal malaria chemo prevention. Places like in Burkina Faso, making sure that we can get those essential life-saving drugs to kids so they don't suffer from seasonal malaria, but being very careful not to spread COVID in the process by a no-touch philosophy. We're also really, like I said, strongly trying to support the routine activities, including routine case management, as we talked about trying to make sure people have enough protective equipment to deliver the services, and also that people that have an acute febrile illness can present to care in a safe way. But we do understand that there may be more cases of acute febrile illness because of COVID, so we want to make sure countries have enough rapid diagnostic tests to deal with that. We understand that parasitologic diagnosis may get disrupted and may less happen, so they may need more artemisinin combination therapy. So we're trying to help countries do that quantification and work through the whole supply chain to make sure they get the commodities they need. And also those commodities have additional lead times due to COVID. So we're building that into our planning, working with all the partners that provide and help support countries to make sure to pay attention to those lead times to make sure that we're successful. Also, I mentioned that we're trying to keep our finger on the pulse, collectively working with our country partners to understand how is malaria being affected by this process, and also how are health systems being affected. So if there is ever a moment we would have to do something extraordinary and different from the routine activities, we'd be ready to divert those resources and try to protect lives along the way. I think another thing we also talk about at the Global Fund in terms of helping support countries is we never lose track of the threats that were there before COVID-19. We understand and acknowledge that there are changing resistance patterns to insecticides. So we're really trying to help countries, help the global partnership push forward and bring new tools to bear so that within several years, in the short term, we can start not only relying on certain class of insecticide to widen our toolbox. We're also aware that the drugs that we use are very efficacious, but we never want to sit back and rest on our laurels because resistance to drugs may come, and we want to be ready, working with our partners so new tools are ready and available, and so we can keep up the fight and keep strong. So in summary, you've heard from a lot of different people today about how we can be a responsible partner in the effort, but we see at the Global Fund and trying to push the partnership, and that is by continuing to be responsive to country needs, to be reactive to the changing environment, and to be as flexible as we can to respond to those needs, as I said, to protect lives along the way. So with that, I think I'll close. But again, thank you for including the Global Fund, and we will stand ready to support all of you in your efforts to fight malaria and particularly fight COVID-19 so that we leave no one behind in this process. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Scott. Very interesting that there are 2 Scots from the Global Fund. I think we must do a poll. Maybe there are more of you than just the 2 of you. It must be a very popular name. So here we are. We have a real sense of hope at the same time that we can see the enormity of the challenge. And so to you panelists, just in 1 minute, each of you, can you share with us what you think the one key thing in your area that the members of Parliament could do to contribute that could actually make a big difference? If I think the minister, the cabinet secretary has already left us, if I'm not mistaken. So we will have to start with you, Scott. Scott, the first Scott.
The first Scott. Okay. Well, I would just.
What is one thing that you'd like members of Parliament to do?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would reiterate the point I tried to emphasize as much as I could in my remarks about the leadership role that parliaments play in budget allocation, in making sure that we're mobilizing the resources, and particularly doing that in the next few months. It's the next few months where we need to mobilize the resources that we're going to need over the course of the next year in order to mount an effective response. And the only thing I would add to that is the equally important role that parliamentarians play in terms of oversight. Oversight in terms of ensuring that global commitments are being kept, but also ensuring transparency, accountability, everything that's necessary to give all partners globally confidence that we're mounting as effective a response as possible, and to ensure that we're doing that as efficiently as possible. All of that comes down to the role of parliamentarians in terms of budget allocation and oversight.
Thank you so much. Very, very clear. What it is about resources, nationally, budget allocation, global commitments, you know, being faithful to the promises that we have made, particularly countries, and not just donor countries have made to partner countries, but that partner countries themselves have made to their own people. So, 𝗙𝗵𝗃, what do you think? What's your message to the Member of Parliament in 1 minute?
I think what is critical is using the competitive advantage and ensuring that we use the already available resources. And I think that's the approach that Zambia is trying to get, where we look at what is there, because, you know, resources are dicey, especially with COVID-19. Therefore, we want the members of Parliament to use their influence and their competitive advantage to get things done using the already existing infrastructure, the already existing systems, because setting up a complete new budget sometimes isn't easy. So engage all the stakeholders in terms of private sector, public sector, community leaders, and everyone. Let them use their already existing competitive advantage to help us fight malaria globally.
Excellent. And there are so many examples of this. I mean, you have already demonstrated it in Zambia by taking the vehicles that you had what do you call them, impounded, and then donating them to the fight against malaria. And there's so many other examples around the continent of how this could be done. In fact, a UN report that came out the beginning of last month shows that we are close to $3 billion are wasted in the global health sector every year. Some of it to corruption, some of it to inefficiencies. So you are quite right that the watchdog function of Parliament is also extremely important. So can we go to you, Ambassador Kamwe? What is the one key message you are giving MPs?
Thank you very much indeed, my dear sister moderator. Honorable members of Parliament, my appeal is for you to support domestic funding, the budget as presented by the Honorable Minister of Health. And indeed, I would like to echo the leadership as demonstrated by His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya in his statement, and indeed to the entire leadership of ALMA. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Very clear message. Olivia, what is your message from civil society to the members of Parliament?
Thank you. We have many messages, but the one key ask that we have for you, honorable parliamentarians, is that we want to say the success of COVID-19, of malaria, will really depend on people. It's going to depend on us and on people like you who will make the right decisions. So you have the power to decide. And once you are looking at the budget of the country, please think about those communities who need support in their area. And please think about the fact that it's important for them to get those services. Whether it's COVID-19, malaria, TB, HIV, we need our community to get the services on time. And we have, in order to do that, we have to make sure that our national budget increase. We are very far away from supposed to commit. We are very far away from that. So it's really time now, with the lessons learned from COVID-19, to step up, to unite and to ensure that we increase national budget, and that we also ensure that those budget goes to strengthen community system strengthening, community system, make sure that we can increase community health worker coverage, because we're going to need them, as we have seen, and they are the solutions to ensure that we test and treat cases. So domestic funding is key, parliamentarian, and we hope that you will make sure that we increase those national budget and we meet our target of Abuja, and also to ensure that we can reach universal health coverage.
Thank you, Olivia. Scott, I don't know whether you want to come in as well with your one minute message to the members of Parliament.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joy. I guess I would say two quick things. And the first is continue to be the voice for those that don't have one. We have to remember where malaria affects the most are places that are sometimes the hardest to reach or may not have the loudest voice with you parliamentarians. So continue to be the voice of those people. And the secondly, I would say, is push your global partners like the Global Fund to do more and to do better, to be clear, to be flexible with our resources. And ultimately, we have to work together in the fight, because the global partners like the Global Fund are only here to try to be a supportive element so that you collectively can do better. So push us to do better, as I said, and collectively we'll work together in this very, very important fight. Over.
Thank you so much. We have been waiting for questions from social media, and I haven't received any yet. So maybe if while we are waiting for someone to send me the social media questions, I'm told that they are coming in, and please feel free to submit your questions. While we're waiting for the social media questions, I will ask another question to Dr. Kamwi. Dr. Kamwi, we talked about, you talked about collaboration, regional collaboration, and we know that SADC has the E8 that have been established to work on malaria. Now, to what extent do you also work with the SADC Parliamentary Forum, which is the parliamentary organization for the region? Or do you just work directly with the ministers? And if so, if you work with the forum, how do you work with them so that maybe you could encourage other regions to create a similar structure?
Thank you very much indeed. I think before I can answer this head on, may I say the Windhoek Declaration, signed 2 years ago by our heads of state and government, had mandated the SADC Secretariat to work together with the E8 Secretariat in order for them to operationalize how to get onto the member state. First, through the SADC Secretariat as the clearinghouse. And secondly, the E8 is now the malaria desk decision, where we would be addressing all SADC member states, including the committees related to social. That includes health at large and other social ills. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Kamwi. There's a question on domestic production of medicines and diagnostics, which I would like to ask 𝗨𝗏𝗄𝗎 as a representative of the Malaria Council in Zambia. Now, the question is, isn't this a path that endemic countries should be following and more aggressively than they are currently doing? That is local production of pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. 𝗨𝗏𝗄𝗎. You are mute. Please unmute.
The recommendation is more than welcome. It could be a path that we could be pursuing, but we must acknowledge that there are global dynamics that come into play, in the sense that do we have the expertise, do we have the raw materials and other things? So I think in terms of pursuing that path, it's purely a cost-benefit analysis that needs to be done country by country, region by region, and see whether it's possible to take it up or not. Because in some sectors, it may be cheaper to produce locally. But as you know, the global supply chain is quite dynamic. Sometimes it may be cheaper to bring in a finished product. So depending on to country situation.
Thank you. And just to add a little bit on that one, NEPAD has actually done a mapping of the pharmaceutical industry in Africa, and found that there are actually about 800 manufacturers in Africa, but very few of them, of course, manufacturing at the level where they can produce goods that can be pre-qualified by WHO and therefore be exportable to other countries, and even be assured of to be of the right quality and efficacy. So so they are efforts to work with these manufacturers, and also to even produce the active pharmaceutical ingredients, even if before going to the actual manufacturing process. And I think the members of parliament can play a big role in this, in aggressively promoting this. It is part of the Continental Free Trade Agreement objective that we talked about earlier on. The other question that is coming from our colleagues is, how can policymakers scale up commitment to the malaria response? Now, how do they scale it up? Because we know that the response before the pandemic was not adequate. So it is not just a question of sustaining the interventions, but scaling them up. So how can we scale up, and how can the members of parliament support the scaling up process? I don't know whom I should ask, whom I have not asked. Maybe I should ask 𝗧cie𝗽𝗀𝗆, since you're talking about that type of thing.
Sure. I'll do my best to answer that question. I mean, I think this is always a very difficult question, and it's very important that we collectively fight any complacency around malaria. Not only understanding that as a baseline disease, it's so detrimental to individual families, it's so detrimental to economies. And even before COVID-19, and then the set of COVID-19, it's sometimes difficult to maintain that malaria exceptionalism. But I think it's always really important to remember how unique a disease malaria is in the context of health promotion. It truly is the most one of the most challenging ways, like I said, for individuals, communities, societies at large to progress when malaria is the foot on the neck of them. So in the context of COVID-19, I think the important thing is not forgetting how significant and powerful that force of malaria can be on communities, not lose track of that, make sure that what we're doing in the sense of COVID-19 also helps malaria, like making health providers feel comfortable doing their job, making sure that people feel comfortable providing services, that these big surge of activities like distributing bed nets continue. So for me, it's really playing to the very core of why malaria is so important to get rid of collectively, community by community, country by country, eventually achieving elimination on the path to eradication. We cannot forget that malaria is a scourge on societies. And so I really think trying to articulate that, play to people's strength, if it's health, if it's economic well-being, really try to articulate that continued message, because malaria is a unique disease and it is a unique problem that we have to deal with, and we can't be derailed by COVID. And like I said, not only do we want to do the routine activities, there's in no sense do we want to rest on our laurels. We need to push forward with the fight against malaria and be successful. So let's not let this derail our collective efforts. Over.
Thank you. There's a question now, or sort of the other side of the same coin. We can see the way countries and the global community are responding to COVID-19. It's been given priority, it's the front burner, and everybody is committed to actually addressing it effectively, whether they be researchers, manufacturers, policymakers, implementers, the soldiers in the fight against the COVID, that is the health workers, in the front line. Everybody has made it a priority. Now, how do we in the malaria community take advantage of this collective response, the strength of this collective response, in order to make the malaria response stronger. How do we do that? I think if all of you can answer that question, 1 minute each, and starting with you, 𝗧cie𝗽𝗆𝗆, not 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗀𝗃.
Well, I think a big part of doing that effectively is talking about, you know, how connected the responses to all of these diseases are. You know, I mentioned earlier that for nearly 20 years, about a quarter of Global Fund funding has been going into strengthening underlying health systems. So, you know, again, it's making sure that we have strong labs and lab networks, you know, a well-trained healthcare workforce, financial systems that work well, data systems, strengthening local supply chains, all of that. The reason why such a huge portion of our funding goes towards health system strengthening is that all of those things are essential to make progress towards the 3 diseases that we have focused on, malaria, TB, and HIV. You can't achieve the SDG targets without making more targeted investments in all of those areas to ensure we have stronger health systems. Stronger health systems are also what is fundamental for pandemic response, and we've all seen that, shown very starkly in these past few months. And so much of those investments that we have needed to be making all along in underlying health systems for these other diseases that are killing millions of people each year, it's those capabilities that are so crucial now for an effective response to COVID, and that we're seeing really need to be scaled up very dramatically.
Thank you so much, Scott. Ambassador Kamwe, how can we benefit from this experience in the malaria community?
Thank you very much indeed, moderator. I think to kickstart, may I say, let's not waste the epidemic. COVID-19 is there to live with us. The scientists are telling us it may get into the second year. It may take us to some 2 years or so. In malaria, moderator, we already have the community health workers already on the ground. Maybe what needs to be done, which we in SADC at EA had already advised, is that governments, through the ministries of health, may consider to use the existing health workers who are already with the communities on the ground, thereby supporting them with the PPEs in order for them to survive and carry out the necessary work that is diagnostic, testing, and treating. In as long as they are being protected, they are protecting themselves from getting infected. I think if we can go it that way, we might see light by the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. The same question to you, Olivia, 1 minute, and then 𝗙𝗵𝗄𝗃 1 minute. Olivia?
Yes, thank you. So we need to ensure that manufacturers continue to produce the tools that we need for malaria in the context of COVID-19. It's very critical, especially rapid diagnostic tests and treatment. We need to make sure those manufacturers continue also at the same time to invest in malaria, even if the need for COVID-19 is also strong. So we need to make sure that there's not a choice to make between the two, but that they can continue to manufacture both. And we also need to make sure we take advantage of this global collaborative efforts to make sure that we really address issues around discrimination, gender, stigma, human rights, equity, to make sure we really look at those aspects because they are essential in actually affecting access to services for certain population and certain community. So the worlds need to come together as well and to look at those issues and to ensure that we have equity in terms of access of services, that gender barriers are removed, human rights barriers, stigma, and any other factor, economical factor, that we make sure that the communities who need the services can actually access them on a timely basis. And we know it's possible, and we know how fast, for example, for COVID-19, vaccines are being developed. We need a vaccine for malaria. We need a vaccine for TB, HIV. We really need that community to also to continue to come together and work on all the issues that affect access to services for our community.
Thank you. 𝗙𝗵𝗃, you have exactly 1 minute.
Thank you. I think COVID-19 has, I would describe it as a good case study for us to use it as a learning channel in which we can find better ways of dealing with malaria. I think if you have seen the efforts, the energy that has been, if we would use this as a learning or as a case study, I think we can also use similar approach. Biased towards communication. If you have seen how much the media have set the agenda, there's what we call the agenda setting theory in terms of the publicity and everything. If we were to put in such energy into the malaria fight, I think we'd definitely get everywhere.
Thank you so much, everybody. This is a very important topic, and we could never exhaust what needs to be said. Leadership is where everything starts, and it is where the accountability ends. So the opportunities for leadership are everywhere along the continuum, whether you start at community level or whether you start at international level. And this is the message that is coming out very, very clearly from this chat that we have had and this roundtable, that we have to balance in delivery of healthcare. We must step up our efficiency and effectiveness and competitiveness. And in order to do that, we have to work together, whether we are mobilizing resources, whether we are addressing that the shortage of stocks, making sure that there are stocks and commodities through manufacturing, and including domestic manufacturing, supporting supply chain, and whether we are strengthening the health systems, that is through provision of PPE, or ensuring that data is properly collected and is adequately reported so that the international health regulations are observed. This is one big advantage for us to do it now forever and therefore include malaria. But we must keep an eye on the old malaria challenges and make sure that as we move forward, the research is continuing, the development of new tools is continuing. And in all of these areas, we see a role for members of parliament. The members of parliament are critical at every single stage, and everybody is ready to engage with the members of parliament and make sure that they are part of the leadership that is going to garner the solutions that will end the fight against malaria on the African continent and globally. I thank you all so much, and we thank the members of parliament for giving us this opportunity, and of course Unite for giving us this opportunity to share our ideas. Unite is indeed uniting the malaria community, not just the members of parliament, in the fight against malaria. And we want to applaud this initiative and wish you all every success individually and collectively, and stand ready, all of us who are in this panel, to work with you and to support you as we go through this challenge and towards a continent and a planet that is free of malaria. Thank you so much. And please stay safe. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Great, you've done well, extremely well. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Honorable Joy. I will second your comments as well. Thank you so much for the panelists for providing such clear policy actions for parliamentarians to not forget the fight for malaria, and encouraging the collaboration, actually stressing the need for collaboration with the community so we not forget this fight. So thank you so much for the panelists. Thank you, Honorable Joy. And thank you to our partners at the RBM Partnership for Malaria and the Global Fund for collaborating and supporting for this panel session. So we now will take a break before returning to the next panel session. We invite you to take this opportunity to interact with the other participants at the summit within the networking area of the platform. You can chat directly with each other. You can even connect on social media to support engagement following the event. Thank you, and we will see you back here shortly at 2 p.m. local Lisbon time. Thank you so much, and see you soon.